The alarm on the monitoring station didn't sound like much, just a soft beep that repeated every few seconds. But to the technician watching the screens, it meant something had gone very wrong. Ambassador arrived at the station within the hour. His scaled skin reflected the dim blue lights of the control room as he studied the data. The prison on the human moon had stopped transmitting. All of it. Every channel, every signal, every automated system report. Nothing but silence. "How long?" he asked. 8 hours since the last transmission, the technician replied. She was young, like him, and her hands shook slightly as she pulled up the records. The last message was routine. Evening count complete, all secure. Then nothing. His throat sac expanded with stress. He knew what that prison held. 4,000 humans. Not just any humans, but the worst their species had produced. Murderers. War criminals. Psychopaths so dangerous that even humanity, with all their strange ideas about mercy, had decided these individuals could never be released. "Call an emergency council session," he said quietly. The Galactic Council chamber filled quickly. Representatives from 24 species gathered, their various forms of concern evident in chittering mandibles, twitching tails, and color-shifting skin, stood at the central podium and explained the situation. "Facility 7 Terra has gone silent. We have no communication with the guards or the automated systems. We have no way of knowing if the prisoners are contained or if they have escaped." The chamber erupted. A delegate slammed 3 of her 4 arms on her desk. "Those humans are monsters. If they've escaped, they could threaten this entire sector." "We don't know they've escaped," a calmer voice interjected. Commander rose from his seat. He was too, but older, with scars across his thick gray hide. "We know nothing. That's the problem." Nodded. "Commander is correct. We need to investigate before we panic. I propose we send a team." "I'll lead it," said immediately. "But I need specialists. A psychologist who understands humans. A tech expert who can access their systems." "And a human," someone added from the back. The council turned to see Myra standing near the observer seats. She wasn't a delegate, just a civilian contractor who worked on the station's computer systems. But she was human, and right now, that mattered. "The facility was built by humans, using human security systems," Myra continued. "You'll need someone who thinks like them to figure out what happened." The council debated for another hour but eventually agreed. Commander would lead the investigation team. Doctor, a L psychologist known for studying human behavior, would join him. Security officer, a cautious with experience in dangerous situations, would provide tactical support, and Myra would come as their technical consultant. They left the next morning on a fast courier ship. The journey would take 3 days. During those 3 days, the team reviewed everything they knew about Facility 7 Terra. It sat on an isolated moon, far from any trade routes. The facility was built like a fortress, with walls that could withstand orbital bombardment. Inside, the prisoners lived in individual cells, monitored constantly by guards and automated systems. "The human stationed 247 guards there," Doctor said, reviewing her notes. She was thin and tall, with pale skin and large dark eyes. All of them were veterans, trained in psychology, combat, and crisis management, the best humanity could provide. "And they're guarding 4,000 of humanity's worst," added nervously. His fur rippled with barely contained anxiety. "What kind of species creates such dangerous individuals?" Myra looked up from her data pad. "Every species has criminals. We just have more humans, so we have more criminals." "But these aren't ordinary criminals," Doctor said softly. "I've studied their files. Mass murderers, torturers, people who committed atrocities during the war. Some of them killed hundreds, one killed thousands." The ship went quiet after that. Commander spent most of the journey in the weapons locker, checking and rechecking their equipment. He'd faced dangerous situations before, but something about this mission unsettled him. A human prison going silent shouldn't scare him this much. He'd fought in wars. He'd dealt with riots and terrorists and pirates. But he'd never had to walk into a facility full of humanity's nightmares. On the third day they arrived. The prison moon appeared on their screens, gray and barren. The facility itself was a massive structure on the surface, built from dark metal that absorbed the weak sunlight. "Scanning now," Myra said from the pilot's seat. "The structure is intact, no damage visible, power systems are online, life support is functioning." "But still no communications," noted. "No, the transmitters are working. They're just not transmitting anything." They docked at the emergency port. The airlock cycled slowly, and the team stepped into the facility corridor with weapons drawn. Emergency lighting bathed everything in a soft red glow. The silence was immediate and oppressive. No alarms, no voices, no sounds of machinery or footsteps, just the faint hum of the life support systems. "This is wrong," whispered. His weapon tracked across the empty corridor. "Where is everyone?" They moved deeper into the facility. The corridors were clean, too clean. No signs of struggle, no blood, no damage to the walls or floors. It looked like everyone had simply vanished. Myra accessed a wall panel and pulled up the security logs. The system is still tracking everything. According to this, all prisoners are accounted for. They're in their cells, locked down in emergency containment. "And the guards?" asked. "No tracking data. They're not wearing their communication badges." They split into two groups and headed for the control center, and Myra moved toward the guard quarters. The control center was empty but operational. All the screens showed green status indicators. The prisoner monitoring system displayed 4,000 active life signs, each one neatly labeled with a cell number. "They're all there," said, studying the data. "Every single prisoner in their cells alive." Examined the guard stations. Coffee cups sat on desks, still half full. A jacket hung on a chair. A data pad showed a half-finished game of some human puzzle. "They left in a hurry," he said, "but not in panic. Look at this." He pointed to a row of communication badges on a charging rack, all 247 of them. "They took off their badges and placed them here, neatly, on purpose." Meanwhile, and Myra were in the guard quarters. The rooms were pristine, beds made, personal items organized, but every room was empty. "It's like they packed up and left," said, opening a closet. "The uniforms were gone. They took their clothes but left everything else." Myra knelt by a bed and picked up a small photograph. It showed a human woman with two children. She turned it over. On the back, someone had written, "I'm sorry, I can't anymore." She pocketed the photo and keyed her communicator. "Commander, you need to see the cell blocks." They met at the entrance to cell block A. The massive door was sealed, showing emergency lockdown status. Myra overrode the system, and the door slid open with a heavy grinding sound. The cell block was enormous, with 5 levels of cells surrounding a central area. Each cell had a transparent front wall, allowing the guards to observe the prisoners. Emergency lighting cast everything in red and shadow. The prisoners were there, all of them, standing at the front of their cells watching. 4,000 pairs of human eyes followed the investigation team as they walked into the central area. "This is deeply unsettling," whispered. The prisoners didn't move, didn't speak. They just watched with expressions that ranged from amused to sad to something that might have been pity. Approached the nearest cell. Inside, a human man stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He was older, with gray hair and a calm face. His prisoner identification listed him as convicted of 23 murders. "What happened here?" demanded. Just smiled slightly, said nothing. They tried other prisoners. Same response, just silence and those knowing looks. "They're not going to tell us," Myra said. "They're waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" asked. Before anyone could answer, his communicator chirped. It was the technician back at the station. "Commander, we've been analyzing the facility's outgoing messages. We found something in the data buffer. It was queued to send but never transmitted. Shall I forward it to you?" "Yes, immediately." A moment later, his data pad pinged. He opened the file. It was a document, handwritten in human script. He handed it to Myra. "Read it." Myra's face went pale as she scanned the words. "By unanimous decision of all personnel, we hereby resign our positions effective immediately. We cannot continue. The work has become impossible. We are not equipped to handle what we face here. This is not a failure of duty but a recognition of human limitation. We have secured all prisoners and set the facility to automated lockdown. We ask forgiveness for abandoning our posts, but we have no choice. We cannot stay." She looked up at the team. It's signed by all 247 guards. The team stood in stunned silence. Around them, the prisoners continued their quiet observation. "I don't understand," said slowly. "The prisoners are contained. There was no riot, no violence. What happened that made all the guards leave?" One of the prisoners laughed. It was a soft sound, but in the silence of the cell block it carried. They turned to see a woman in one of the upper cells. She leaned against the transparent wall, arms crossed. "You want to know what happened?" she called down. Her voice echoed off the metal walls. "Nothing happened, that's the point. We didn't have to do anything. We just had to exist." Stared up at her. "Explain." The woman smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Why don't you ask us yourselves? We'll talk. We'll answer all your questions, but you have to really listen to the answers." Myra looked at. "We need to transport some of them back to the station for questioning." "Is that safe?" asked. "They're in emergency lockdown," Myra said. "The cells are designed to be mobile. We can transfer them without ever releasing them." Made a decision he would later question many times. "Select 12 prisoners, ones who are willing to talk. We'll bring them back for formal interviews." As the team worked to prepare the prisoner transfer, finally spoke from his cell. Just 4 words, quiet and clear. "You won't understand yet." Turned to face him. "Understand what?" His expression was almost sympathetic. "What it means to be human, what it costs to be human. Your people see us as monsters, but monsters are easy to guard. The problem is we're not monsters, we're just human, and that's so much worse." The words sent a chill through the team that none of them could explain. They completed the transfer in silence, loading 12 mobile cells onto their ship. As they departed, looked back at the facility. Thousands of prisoners remained inside, waiting patiently in their cells. The automated systems would keep them fed and healthy, but something felt fundamentally wrong about leaving them there. "Commander," said quietly beside him, "I've reviewed the guards' psychiatric reports. In the last year, 100% of the staff showed symptoms of severe depression. 70% had anxiety disorders. 40% were on medication for trauma-related conditions. They were guarding dangerous criminals," said. "Stress is expected." "Yes," agreed. "But the reports indicate the stress wasn't from violence or threats. It was from conversation, from listening to the prisoners talk about their crimes, about why they did what they did." She pulled up a file on her data pad. "The last prison counselor's report, filed 2 weeks ago," she wrote. "The prisoners are not trying to escape or cause harm. They're simply honest about who they are and why they became what they became. That honesty is breaking my staff. They see themselves in these people and they can't bear it." Stared at the screen, trying to understand. Behind them, in the cargo bay, 12 of humanity's worst criminals waited in their cells. Soon, he would interview them. Soon, he would begin to understand why an entire facility of trained guards had walked away from their posts. Soon, he would learn why the human prison went silent. But for now, as his ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, He could only wonder what truth could be terrible enough to break 247 trained professionals. What could humanity's criminals say? That was worse than anything they could do. The interview room on the Galactic Council station was designed for security, reinforced walls, a prisoner cell sealed behind triple-layer energy barriers, armed guards stationed at every entrance. Commander sat at a table with Doctor, reviewing their approach. "We'll start with," said. "He has the most stable psychological profile among our 12 subjects." Stable, scales darkened with skepticism. The man murdered 23 people. Yes, but he's been cooperative during his entire sentence. Never violent, never disruptive. The prison reports indicate he was actually well liked by some of the guards. Until all those guards resigned. Inclined her head in acknowledgement. Yes, until then. They brought into the room. His mobile cell was positioned across from the table, close enough for conversation but separated by the barrier field. Sat calmly, hands folded in his lap. He looked like someone's grandfather, not a convicted killer. "Mr. began, thank you for agreeing to speak with us." "Dr. Commander," nodded to each of them. "I'm happy to help, though I suspect you won't be happy with what I have to say." "We need to understand what happened at the facility," said bluntly. "Why did all the guards leave?" Was quiet for a moment, considering. "Let me ask you something first, Commander. Do you think I'm a monster?" Didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Fair enough," smiled slightly. "That's what most people think. It's easier that way. If I'm a monster, then you don't have to worry. You're not like me. You could never do what I did. You're safe from becoming me." "I could never do what you did," confirmed. "Couldn't you?" Leaned forward. "I was a teacher once, history. I had students who loved my classes. I had colleagues who respected me. I had a wife who thought I was kind." "And then you killed 23 people," interjected. "And then I killed 23 people," agreed. "Over the course of 4 years. Do you want to know why?" "Yes," said. Settled back in his seat. "The first one was justified, at least I thought it was. A man who had hurt my daughter. The police couldn't prove it, but I knew he did it, so I killed him, and I felt nothing but righteous." He paused, his expression distant. "The second one was easier. Someone who had wronged me professionally. I convinced myself he deserved it too. Had I not already killed once? What was one more? By the 5th, I had a system. By the 10th, it was routine. By the 20th, I barely remembered their faces." Made notes on her data pad. "You're describing a classic escalation pattern. Loss of empathy through repeated exposure." "No," said sharply. "That's where you're wrong, Doctor. I never lost empathy. That's the lie we tell ourselves about killers. We say they can't feel, can't connect, can't understand pain. But I felt everything. I knew exactly what I was taking from my victims and their families." "Then why continue?" demanded. "Because I convinced myself it was acceptable. That's the human trick, Commander. We can hold two contradictory thoughts at once. I knew killing was wrong. I also believed my killing was justified. Every human does this in small ways every day. They know lying is wrong, but they lie when it's convenient. They know cruelty is wrong, but they're cruel when they're angry. They know prejudice is wrong, but they make exceptions for their own biases." Look directly at. "I wasn't born a monster. I became one through small steps, each one justified in the moment. And that's what I told my guard. That's what broke her." "What do you mean?" asked quietly. "Her name was Sarah. Young woman, maybe 30, professional, kind, even. She asked me once why I did it, not in disgust or horror but genuine confusion. How does a good person become a bad person? So I told her." His expression grew sad. "I explained every step, every justification, every moment where I chose to prioritize my wants over others' lives. And I watched her face as she realized that she made similar choices every day. Just smaller ones, less permanent ones, but the same mental process. She started seeing herself in me, started wondering where her line was. started questioning every decision she'd ever made. Had she been cruel when she thought she was just being honest? Had she prioritized her comfort over others? How far was she from becoming me? Felt uncomfortable. That's manipulation. Is it? Shrugged. I just told the truth. Humans are capable of great good and terrible evil, Commander, often at the same time, often the same person. Your species can categorize criminals as fundamentally different from you, but humans can't. Every guard in that prison looked at us and saw what they could become. That's what they couldn't handle. The interview continued for another hour, but's mind kept returning to words. When they finally ended the session and returned to his holding cell, turn 2. He's right, about human psychology. He's trying to justify his crimes, argued. No, he's explaining them. That's different and more disturbing. The second interview was with Dr. Security Officer conducted this one, with observing. Doctor was smaller, older, with short gray hair and an academic demeanor. Her crimes were different than's. She had conducted illegal experiments on prisoners of war during a conflict 3 decades ago. Doctor began, his fur rippling with barely contained discomfort. Can you explain what happened at the facility? I can explain what I did, she replied calmly. Whether that's what you're really asking is another matter. Please proceed. Doctor folded her hands. I was assigned a guard named Thomas. Military background, strong, professional. He never showed fear or disgust around the prisoners. Very admirable. One day he asked me about my research, the experiments I had conducted. I think he expected me to be defensive or ashamed. But I wasn't. I explained it to him clinically. How I had convinced myself the research was necessary. How I had used the same ethical framework that military medical research uses. Sacrifice the few to save the many. Shifted uncomfortably. Your experiments killed innocent people. Yes, and military actions kill innocent people too. That's not a defense of my actions. It's an observation of shared logic. Doctor's voice remained even. I told Thomas how I had started with small ethical compromises, tests that caused minor pain, justified because the subjects were criminals anyway, then larger compromises, then experiments that were purely about curiosity rather than medical benefit, each step justified by the previous step. She paused, and I watched Thomas's face as he recognized the pattern. He'd been a soldier. He'd followed orders that killed civilians. Collateral damage, they called it. Acceptable losses. He told himself those deaths were justified because he was following orders, protecting his country, doing his duty. That's not the same thing, protested. Isn't it? Doctor tilted her head. The mechanism is identical. Use abstract reasoning to justify causing harm to specific individuals. Tell yourself it's necessary. Tell yourself you're serving a greater good. Tell yourself you're just following orders or protocol or logic. I didn't make Thomas question whether what I did was wrong. He knew it was wrong. I made him question whether what he did was different, and he couldn't find a good answer. None of the guards could. The interview left shaken. He excused himself afterward, claiming he needed air. Found him in an observation deck, staring out at the stars. She's manipulating you, said gently. Is she? Turned. Or is she just telling the truth in a way that's uncomfortable? Both can be true. His ears flattened against his head. I've killed in the line of duty. I've followed orders that resulted in casualties. I've never questioned it before, but now, he trailed off. Now you're wondering if there's a difference between your choices and theirs. Completed the thought. Said nothing, he didn't have to. The third interview was the one insisted on conducting himself. James, known as the Reaper. 30 confirmed murders over a decade. He was humanity's nightmare, the kind of killer that appeared in cautionary tales. Looked ordinary. Average height, average build, and unremarkable face. He could have been anyone. Commander, said pleasantly, I've been looking forward to speaking with you. Why? Demanded. Because you're the one who doesn't want to understand. You want to believe I'm fundamentally different from you, alien in mind if not in body. It's important to you that monsters exist, because then you don't have to worry about becoming one. I am fundamentally different from you. Are you? Leaned forward. Tell me, Commander, have you ever killed? In combat, in defense of innocent lives. So you've taken life but justified it to yourself as necessary. Nodded. And when you killed, did you feel anything? Scales flushed dark with anger. That's not relevant. It's completely relevant because I felt things too. Guilt, shame, horror at what I was doing. I'm not a psychopath, Commander. I'm not missing emotions. I have all the normal human feelings. I just learned to ignore them. How? The question came out before could stop it. Settled back. Small steps. The first kill is hard. You think it will destroy you, but it doesn't. You're still you, still capable of love and joy and normal life. That's the first betrayal of your moral compass. You realize you can do terrible things and still function. The second kill is easier because you've already proven you can survive it. The third is easier still. By the 10th, you've developed routines, ways of thinking that make it manageable. You're not becoming a monster. You're just learning to cope with being one. He met's eyes. And that's what I told my guard, a young man barely 25. He asked me why I kept killing if I felt guilty. So I told him, because feeling guilty didn't stop me. Because humans are very good at living with cognitive dissonance. Because knowing something is wrong and stopping yourself from doing it are two different skills, and the second one is much harder. His voice dropped. I told him that every killer in this prison had a story like mine. We didn't start as monsters. We became them through choices, justifications, and learned behaviors. And I asked him, what choices is he making? What is he justifying? How far is he from my path? He started having nightmares after that. So did most of the guards, because they couldn't what we told them, couldn't unsee the pattern, couldn't stop wondering if the only difference between us and them was opportunity and circumstance. Stood abruptly. You're trying to corrupt them, make them doubt themselves. No, said quietly. We're just honest, brutally, terribly honest, and humans can't handle that honesty when it comes from someone like me. Because if a monster like me is telling the truth, what does that make them? The interview ended, stormed out, but's words followed him. Later that night, the investigation team gathered to review their findings. Myra had been listening to all the interviews remotely, and now she stood before the others with a grim expression. You're all missing the point, she said bluntly. Enlighten us, said, his tone sharp with frustration. The prisoners didn't weaponize violence or fear. They weaponized empathy. Looked up sharply. Explain. Every other species in the galaxy can look at criminals and see them as other. Different biology, different psychology, different category of being. But human guards can't. Every prisoner is a reminder that humans contain the capacity for both great good and terrible evil. The guards couldn't maintain the psychological distance they needed. Myra pulled up files on her data pad. Look at the prison psychiatrist's reports. The guards weren't traumatized by violence. They were traumatized by recognition, by seeing themselves in the prisoners, by understanding that they too could make the choices that led to becoming monsters. But they didn't make those choices, protested. Yet, Myra said, that's the word that haunted them. They didn't make those choices yet, but could they, under the right circumstances, with the right justifications? That's what the prisoners made them confront every single day. She looked at each of them. You've all been affected by these interviews. I can see it. Made you question your certainty. Doctor made you examine your own ethical compromises. Made you wonder about your capacity for evil. And you've only talked to them for a few hours. The guards lived with 4,000 of them for years. The room went silent. We tortured them, said slowly. Not physically, psychologically, by forcing them to guard people who showed them exactly how they could become monsters themselves. And now no one wants to take over, added. Because we've all read the interview transcripts. Every species that was asked to staff the prison refused. Communicator chirped. It was the Galactic Council. 3 more species had declined to provide guards for the prison. The facility remained in automated lockdown with 4,000 prisoners and no staff. What do we do? Asked. We can't leave them there indefinitely. We can't release them, and apparently we can't guard them. We need to talk to the human government, said finally. They need to solve this problem. These are their criminals. But as the team prepared to travel to Earth, Myra was already thinking ahead. She'd been talking to the prisoners during the transport. Not officially, just conversations through the cell barriers. They told her something interesting. They had an idea, a proposal, something that might solve everyone's problem. She just wasn't sure anyone would be willing to listen to it. After all, who takes advice from monsters? 3 weeks passed. The prison remained silent, its thousands of occupants kept alive by automated systems. The Galactic Council grew increasingly desperate. Protests piled up from dozens of species demanding the facility be removed from their territory. Not because they feared escape, but because they feared what the prisoners represented. Commander stood in the conference room of the Human Defense Committee on Earth. Around the table sat the officials responsible for humanity's criminal justice system. Defense Secretary Maria sat at the head, reviewing the investigation reports with a grim expression. So your conclusion is that our prisoners broke the guards through honesty, she said finally. Through forced self-recognition, Doctor corrected gently. The guards couldn't maintain the psychological separation they needed to do their jobs. We've known this for years, Maria admitted. She pulled up statistics on the wall screen. Prison guards on Earth have the highest rates of PTSD, depression, and suicide of any profession, higher than combat soldiers, higher than emergency responders. We've known the work destroys people. We just told ourselves it was a necessary sacrifice. Can you not simply rotate guards more frequently? Asked. We tried that, it didn't help. The damage is cumulative, but it's also immediate. Some guards lasted years, others lasted weeks. Maria sighed heavily. The isolation of Facility 7 Terra just made it impossible to ignore anymore. We put our best people in a confined space with our worst people, and our best people broke. So what do you intend to do? Demanded. You cannot execute them under your laws, you cannot release them, and you cannot imprison them. Actually, Myra spoke up from her position by the wall. The prisoners have a proposal. Everyone turned to look at her. You've been talking to them? Maria asked. Yes, unofficially. They asked me to relay an offer. We don't negotiate with criminals, one of the committee members said sharply. They're not asking for freedom, Myra continued. They're offering their services. The room erupted in protests. Maria held up a hand for silence. Explain. Myra pulled up her data pad and projected her notes. The prisoners believe they understand something valuable. They know every step on the path from good person to monster. Every justification, every rationalization, every psychological mechanism that allows people to commit atrocities while believing they're doing the right thing. And they think that knowledge is useful. Useful how? Asked skeptically. As educators, advisors, consultants. Myra looked around the room. The galaxy is advancing rapidly. New weapons, new technologies, new ethical dilemmas. Each advancement brings opportunities for people to convince themselves that terrible things are necessary. The prisoners believe they can teach others to recognize those patterns before they fall into them. You're suggesting we give humanity's worst criminals positions of influence. The committee member looked horrified. I'm suggesting we let them serve their sentences productively, Myra said. They remain confined, monitored, restricted, but instead of just existing in cells, they work. They teach ethics courses. They consult on military and research protocols. They help others avoid becoming what they became. Maria was silent, thinking, "It's a disturbing idea." "But not without precedent," Doctor interjected. "Many human rehabilitation programs use former criminals as counselors and educators. The principle is sound." "Those programs use people who served their time," another committee member protested. "These prisoners will never be released. We're talking about giving life sentences meaningful work." "Yes," Maria said softly, "we are, and maybe that's not a bad thing." The debate stretched for hours, but eventually a consensus emerged. They would propose a trial program. 30 prisoners would volunteer for the first phase. They would be assigned to different sectors as consultants, with heavy monitoring and restrictions. If it worked, the program would expand. The proposal went before the Galactic Council 2 days later. The chamber erupted in argument. Species after species voiced their outrage. "You want us to listen to criminals?" Ambassador's throat sac expanded fully. "To give them influence over our military and research programs?" "We're asking you to consider their expertise," Maria replied calmly. "These individuals have intimate knowledge of how good people rationalize evil acts. That knowledge could prevent others from making the same mistakes. Or it could spread their corruption," another delegate argued. Doctor stood. "With respect, the prisoners have already demonstrated their ability to influence others. They did it by simply existing and speaking honestly. This proposal at least directs that influence toward productive purposes." The debate continued for 3 days. Finally, a vote was called. The motion passed narrowly. The Conscience Program, as it came to be called, would proceed on a trial basis. Commander watched the vote with mixed feelings. Part of him still believed this was madness. But another part, the part that had listened to and Doctor and wondered if maybe the prisoners were right. Maybe humanity's greatest criminals did understand evil in a way that could help others avoid it. The first 30 prisoners were transferred to their assignments. James, the serial killer, was sent to the military academy as a consultant on ethical warfare and the psychology of dehumanization. 6 months later, found himself visiting his classroom. He told himself it was for inspection purposes, but truthfully, he was curious. He wanted to see if this insane idea was actually working. He stood at the back of the lecture hall as spoke to a room full of young officers. Looked the same as he had in the prison cell. Ordinary, unremarkable, but the cadets watched him with complete attention. "Your instructors teach you to call enemies targets and hostiles," was saying. "That linguistic distance is intentional. It makes killing easier. I taught myself similar tricks. I called my victims projects and subjects." The terminology was different, but the psychological mechanism was identical. Both create distance between you and the person you're harming. A cadet raised her hand. "But in military operations, that distance is necessary. We can't function if we're constantly thinking about the personhood of our targets." "You're absolutely right," agreed. "And that's the trap. The distance is necessary for you to function, but it's also the first step toward atrocity. The question you have to ask yourselves constantly is, am